Well, hey there, and welcome to the Intentional Academy podcast, where we believe that life is best when it is lived on purpose. If you want help finding time for what matters most, launching your dream career, and building a prosperous future, then you should visit us at intentionalacademy.com. I'm your host, Tony Farrar, and I am thrilled that you're tuning in today. This is the first ever episode of the Intentional Academy podcast. It's been a dream and a goal of ours for a long time, and I'm thrilled to finally be bringing it to life. That being said, I'm also recording this during the 2020 corona crisis, and that's got us all working from home. You're likely to hear my family in the background. I'm not using the recording technology that I originally hoped to. But I also know that getting this message out is way more important than things like audio quality. So bear with me and enjoy this inspiration as a distraction, I hope, from watching the latest headlines. Here's what you can expect today. 3 stories of times that I hit rock bottom. 3 times that I found myself facing a wake-up call. 3 times that I had to make a change or lose everything that really mattered. It starts in grad school when I allowed myself to become a complete workaholic and almost lost the most important relationship in my life. Next, having finally graduated after 12 years of college, I woke up buried in debt, wondering how we'd even make the payments. And lastly, I lost my job just a year later. With our first kid on the way, no income, and no health insurance, I had to rethink everything I knew about my career and about my dreams. Don't worry, that's not where these stories end, or this would be the worst show ever. I'll also share how I turned things around, how I went from working 14-hour days to being home for dinner and actually getting more done, how my wife and I paid off over $95,000 in debt in just 2.5 years while continuing to live a fulfilling life, and how I landed my dream job when all the odds seemed to be stacked against me. As you listen, I hope you'll realize the truth, that this is not a show about me. It's a show about us, you and me. See, we all struggle with time and money and career. We all find ourselves waking up to the realization that we're not where we want to be, and we all look to transform during difficult times in our lives. As I went through these transformation experiences along my own journey, I realized that the people around me were struggling too. They watched as I turned my life around, and then they asked me how I did it. I learned that I wasn't alone, that you're not alone. One by one, I shared with people how I finally reached my dream, that life I wanted most, but always struggled to grasp. One by one, they tried to do the same thing, and one by one, they made it too. And that's how I knew I had to create the Intentional Academy to teach you how to make time for what matters most, launch passionate careers, and build purposeful prosperity. I have to give you a disclaimer though. If you continue listening to this episode, you're going to face a challenge. You're going to see, maybe for your first time, that your life doesn't have to look like a miserable grind where you work too hard and reap too small a reward, trading your precious time for a someday that never comes. You're going to find yourself confronted with a decision: change or continue doing more of the same. Build the life you want most, or let the days continue to drift by on a journey to nowhere. But before we get to that, I'd like you to know that this episode is sponsored by our free Intentional Academy community. The Intentional Academy community is an online discussion group with one goal, and that is to bring people like us together so that we can support each other in living our best lives. You don't have to figure this out on your own. You might be at a low point like I was, or you might just have a feeling that there is more to life than what you're currently experiencing. We each get one life, one chance to spend our time. The Intentional Academy community is here to help make sure that you spend your life doing things you'll look back on and be glad that you did. The big thing that many of us is missing is support. You might have plenty of folks who give you encouragement or advice or offer reassurance, but do you have anyone to talk to who's working on the same kind of growth as you? If not, it can be really lonely, and I don't want that for you, which is why I'm inviting you to join us in the free Intentional Academy community. We use a free messaging platform that runs on mobile and web and desktop apps, and we've got a number of channels in the community so that you can participate in the daily discussions that are most helpful for you. If you'd like to join, visit intentionalacademy.com/community and enter your name and email address in the form. We'll send you our community guidelines along with an invitation link to join the community, an invitation to be connected to a community of people like us doing things like this. Intentionalacademy.com/community is where you should go to sign up and take the first step to making what you learned today in this episode matter. So visit intentionalacademy.com/community to join the free community and start regaining control of your time, your money, and your career. intentionalacademy.com/community. All right, now on to the stories. I think everyone bottoms out at some point in their lives. Some of us do it once. For me, I decided to do it 3 different times. I graduated college for the first time in 2008. Undergrad was an absolute blast, especially the last 2 years of it. I spent most of my time with my best friend Justin and my girlfriend Nicole. We had a great group of friends. We hosted parties. We took trips to Florida for spring break, screamed our lungs out at football games, go Hokies, had margaritas with lunch after class, sometimes skipping the class part. We played Guitar Hero. We played pranks on our neighbors. We ran my Jeep through the mud. We pulled all-nighters just for fun. We drove all over the place to go to concerts. The point here is we played a lot, we squeezed in time for homework, and actually managed to live a pretty balanced life. Schoolwork got done, A's and B's, and we still had a lot of fun. Just after graduation, Nicole and I spent the summer of 2008 backpacking through Europe. We rode trains, we stayed in hostels, we ate delicious food. We saw some amazing sights, we got lost in some places we didn't speak the language, and mostly we just had a really great time together. We were on top of the world when we finally returned to college in August. She had a couple of years left on her communications degree, and I was getting ready to start my master's. So, a little context, if you're fortunate enough to land a funded position as a grad student, the school will actually cover your tuition and then even pay you a small salary. The price that you pay is in time spent teaching or time spent doing research. They recognize this by counting 3 classes as a full load. My advisor warned me that every grad student makes the mistake of simultaneously taking 3 classes once. I made that mistake 3 times before I finally learned. So, my first semester, I signed up for 3 classes. Within 2 weeks, I found myself confronting my first major research deadline. In just 1 month, we would be attending a conference where we had to show our sponsor what it is we'd been doing with their money for the last few years. I was new to the project, but I joined in what I hoped would be the middle and not the end. The stakes were really high. Finishing building this experimental jet engine rig, adding all the instrumentation, and then we had to collect meaningful data in the next month that proved we were on our way to a major discovery. Or lose my funding next month and figure out how to pay for grad school on my own. I threw myself at the work, spending countless hours on the lab. I was there all day. I was there in the early morning. I was there in the evening. I was there in the weekend. I kept telling myself that this was just a short-term problem, a phase. If I just got past this one thing, I'd be funded all the way through the end of my master's and wouldn't have to worry again. The first thing to go were the classes. Remember how I said I signed up for 3? By the end of my first semester, I would only earn credit for 1 of them. In case you're wondering, that instantly doomed me to take longer than the typical 2 years to earn my master's. In fact, it took me 3.5. The only silver lining is that I did manage to get that rig up and running, I did get the data, and I did get the funding I needed to pay for the rest of my degree. But I also laid the foundation for a really unhealthy approach to work and life. I told myself the ends justified the means. I started wearing my busyness as a badge of honor. Have you ever done that? I thought I must be important and more successful than those around me because I was so busy. I taught myself that the best way to get things done was to work crazy hours, pull all-nighters, sacrifice my weekends. I spent most of my master's degree in a haze of cigarettes and energy drinks, telling myself that this is what it takes to be successful. I'll never forget the feeling in the air the day that I realized what this was costing me. Nicole had gone home to New Jersey for winter break while I stayed behind to work at the lab. I had plans to drive up and visit her, and I called one night after work to finalize the details. When I asked her what day I should come, she replied with a detached voice, "I don't care." Have you ever been in a situation like this? Things are so tense that the air seems thick. The hair on your arms stands up, you get a knot in your stomach, and your ears ring a little bit. I remember feeling an almost out of body experience, like I was watching a movie, but it wasn't really me. What do you mean you don't care? For longer than I could remember, I'd been waking up before she did and leaving for work. I'd send a few text messages to check in throughout the day, and then come home after she'd already gone to bed. I'd walked away from the relationship, thinking I could just put her on a shelf and make it up later. Her defense tactic was to pull back too, and she had literally reached the point where she no longer missed me or cared if I came to visit. My stomach dropped. I felt like the floor had fallen away beneath my feet and I was careening downward into a pit. See, I may have left out one really important detail. The biggest reason that I stayed for a master's was that I had met Nicole. My friends had all graduated and moved on. They were working their first real jobs, making great money, buying cars, living that dream life that we all hope for after college. I signed up for 2 more years because Nicole is younger than I. Well, actually, Nicole's still younger than I. We figured that I would be completing my master's at about the same time that she'd be graduating with her undergrad, and we wanted to stay together. So when I found myself in the conversation I was having with her ready to leave, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. How did it come to this? How had I gotten so far from the good old days of video games and margaritas? How had I walked away from all of the fun, leaving her behind with one "I'll be home soon" text after another? As I listened to her detached voice, I realized the truth. Either my work hours would change, or my relationship status would. So one thing you should know about me is I'm actually really good at commitment. Once I decide to do something, I create a system and I do it. And I'm really glad for that because I am sure it saved our relationship. Nicole and I have been married now for almost 9 years. Our third child's on the way. But we were a breath away from ending it that night. Thank goodness I had the awareness to be able to say, "You're right." I made a commitment to her. I would be home by dinner during the week, and I would spend my evenings with her. I wouldn't work weekends anymore. In other words, I would commit to getting my schoolwork and my research work done during normal work week. To make this work, I went out and I got every book on time management that I could get my hands on. We agreed that I would spend one more weekend working to put a system together for managing my life that would mean I would never have to work a weekend again. The only problem was, no one writes books for college students on how to manage their time. The most popular books are written for professionals who are at a very different place in their lives. So I ended up having to create my own system that was built on the principles that I learned in these books, but I realized that a lot of the tactics really just didn't work for college students. So depending on circumstances, tactics change, but at least good principles endure. The change was dramatic. I went from working nights and weekends, never having any fun, constantly exhausted, constantly disengaged from my relationships, to coming home every day for dinner, relaxing during the weekend, and rebuilding a balanced life. It's actually during this time that I first discovered rock climbing, and our first year we spent 26 weekends camping and climbing together. The funny thing is, I actually found myself being more productive. I got more done in far less time. And I think maybe that the details of how I did that are better saved for another conversation. But a big part of it was that I used to waste a lot of time at work. If my attitude was, well, I'm here till 3 a.m. anyhow, I might as well take another smoke break and walk around the parking lot for a little while. I'd do that once an hour. I let myself get sucked into projects that weren't relevant to my goals, or, well, really anyone's for that matter. I'd be a perfectionist, and I'd obsess over things like an email to my boss, spending my precious time editing an email instead of getting meaningful work done. When my attitude shifted to, I have until 5, what matters most? Because I'm going home at 5. I figured out how to focus. I figured out how to get important things done, and I figured out how to move on. I got far more done after I stopped working those crazy hours, and I finished grad school in style. Did I still have big deadlines and a long day here or a weekend there? Yeah, sure. But they became the exception and not the rule. I have never worked long hours regularly again, and I'm constantly amazed at how much I am able to accomplish in both my professional and my personal lives. All right, so now it's time to fast forward a few years. Well, 7 if you want to start counting from when I finished my undergrad. I graduated for the last time in 2015 with my PhD, and somewhere along the way, what happened was we realized that my dream was to become a professor and that master's degree wasn't going to cut it. So, Nicole and I got married. We committed to a few more years of school while I earned the credentials for that dream job. And really, I mean our dream life. Come on, who doesn't want to have a month off each winter and the option to take 3 more months off every summer? I might be joking a little bit there, but the work-life balance of being a professor can be pretty awesome if you're intentional. So, 2015, having just spent 12 years in college, we moved to Florida for my postdoc, which that's like an internship for somebody who's looking to become a professor. In October of that year, a really funny thing happened. For the first time in my life at age 30, I managed to make it 6 months without being enrolled as a full-time student. Some of you might know what that signals, but for those of you who don't, it's the end of your student loan grace period. Remember how I described that gut punch feeling a little bit earlier? My student loan bill, the first one that ever showed up, that was gut punch number 2. The thing I neglected to mention about grad school is that after my productivity increased, so did my paycheck. I actually got promoted into this position called lab manager, and I started coordinating the efforts of 10 grad students. I had a dozen undergrad researchers working for me, and I even taught some classes at Virginia Tech in the engineering school. I actually managed to double my salary as a grad student, and while that wasn't luxurious, it combined with Nicole's full-time income to give us the ability to live pretty comfy. What's funny is that my buddy through grad school never came close to that income, and he lived on his own, but he managed to graduate with a nice savings account. I managed to graduate having built $95,000 worth of debt. About $77,000 of that was student loans from my undergrad. The rest was split between car payments and credit cards. When I graduated, Nicole and I had a brand new car and the payments that went with it. Add to it the credit cards that we used to finance things like eating out 10 meals a week, and we had a real nice stack of debt. We moved to a bigger townhouse because we grew tired of the student apartments near campus. We financed a TV, couches, a dining room set, queen-size bedroom suite, the delivery charges that went with them. Everything a broke grad student in denial needs to fake it like he's already made it. When I graduated, we put the $7,000 bill of moving that houseload of stuff from Virginia down to Florida on a credit card. Found ourselves forced to rent a 3-bedroom apartment in Florida, even though we lived alone, just to fit our stuff. By the time that first student loan bill arrived, the combined monthly minimum payment for all our debts was over $1,400 a month. It was a third of our take-home pay. Not sure if you're aware of this, but when you pay the monthly minimum, your balance doesn't really go down. So sitting there with a third of our income committed to a perpetual bill for things we'd done in the past was, well, a little less than inspiring. What happened to that good life everybody kept promising when I graduated? We'd spent years watching our friends earn real incomes while we lived on a grad school stipend. Now that it was supposed to be fun and cash in on all that hard work and sacrifice, all we could do was afford rice, beans, and peanut butter sandwiches. It started with a few difficult conversations, which that's kind of a nice way of saying Nicole and I were both freaking out and trying to figure out what it is we'd do next. She'd always been a bit wiser than me. This is really no exception. She remained calm and thought things through. I leapt into action without really considering what the plan should be. I started hunting for zero-interest promotional credit cards to transfer our balances to. I started looking into loan consolidation. And then I did something a married person should never do. I made a big financial decision without speaking to my partner. I signed up for a few of those credit cards. I transferred the balance from other cards over there to try and drop the interest rate. I figured that if we could make that payment a little bit smaller, maybe this wouldn't be as painful. So, proud of my accomplishment, I showed her what I'd done. Let's just say she was less than thrilled, and rightfully so. Not only had I made a significant financial move without consulting her, I'd also fallen for the foolish notion that somehow I could borrow my way out of debt. After a very difficult conversation, we realized that it was time to make an intelligent plan together. So we bought some books, we listened to some podcasts, and we came up with a drastic plan. We decided that we would live on as little as possible and throw every penny we could at that debt. Pay it off. Get it out of our lives as fast as possible. No more balancing payments. No more promising our future to pay for the past. We started with a few $1,000s in savings and $95,000 in debt. The first thing we realized was that having a savings account with money in it while we were paying interest on debt was kind of like borrowing the money twice. Every penny that was sitting in that account cost the interest rate of our debt. So, in a drastic first move, we emptied that account down into a $1,000 emergency fund, and we wrote the first big check towards our debt. Now it felt real. We had $1,000 to our name and $95,000 worth of debt to dig out of. 1 month at a time, we ate the peanut butter and we sent the check. We downgraded our apartment. We lived farther away from work to save money. We traded the brand new car for a 10-year-old used one. 32 frugal months later, we paid that last bill and have not borrowed a dollar since. Let me tell you, having the money that we used to send to student loans available to decide what we want to do with every month, that is a great feeling. Y'all, the $1,400 minimum payment is gone. The income is not. Before you get scared off, I think it's important for you to also know that we still had a lot of fun during this time. We took trips. We explored our hobbies. We still made it out for dates. We went to the restaurants and the movies. We bought some toys, but mostly we learned how to enjoy ourselves without doing harm to our financial future. How we did this, again, probably better left for another episode, but right now you should know that for us, the transformation of going through this debt journey was more important than the numbers. We learned how to place value on things that matter most. Money does not buy happiness, but it's a great measurement of what you truly value, and we used to blow our money on things that didn't last. Now, we live a very prosperous life, and we have never felt more freedom to enjoy what this world has to offer. All right, how about one more story to wrap this up? It's about the third time in my adult life that I felt like I'd hit rock bottom. You already heard about how I messed up with my time and my money. This one is about the moment my career went off the rails. It all started back in 2015 as I finished my PhD. Remember, my goal in getting that PhD was to become a professor. That was what I dreamed of. That was what I was certain would be the best way for me to make an impact. So what did I do as I neared graduation? Well, I went to the career fair. Took a stack of freshly minted resumes and a list of companies that I intended to speak to. Not universities, companies looking to hire technical experts to come do engineering for them. Why would I do that? Well, I think two things were pulling at me. The first was the paycheck. Folks with my credentials make a lot more money working in industry than they do teaching. The second was a lack of confidence. Despite my credentials, I knew that the path to becoming a full-time member of the faculty is not easy. I knew it was going to take hard work and sacrifice, and I just wasn't sure how much of that I had left in me. So I wandered around the career fair trying to put a face on that would convince people I wanted to be there. The most common question they asked me was, "Why isn't your GPA on your resume?" Are you kidding me? I started to think they might be unaware of the fact that anything below a B is considered a failing grade in grad school. Everybody who finishes a PhD has a great GPA, or else they don't finish. So I spent 2 days standing in lines at career fair, and I left with 0 interviews. Looking back, I realized there were 2 problems with the career fair. The first was the folks who attended weren't really looking to hire PhDs, so they didn't know what to do with me. The second was I didn't want a single one of those jobs, and I think they knew it before I did. So I regrouped. I talked with my mentors about what steps should be taken if I truly did want to become a professor. With their guidance, I secured a postdoc research position, which is like an internship for future faculty. It was the next step towards my dream career of being a professor at the university. But I want to make sure you hear that right. After 12 years of college and 3 degrees, I finally graduated. Instead of getting that cushy job that everybody else talks about, I got an internship. It paid better than being a grad student, but not by much. So, next thing I did was developed a 2-year plan to perform research, build my resume, and search for faculty positions. That's the typical time people spend at a postdoc, 2 years. You're supposed to start some new research, get some results, publish them during the first year, and then spend the second year hunting for that faculty job. That's what took us to Florida to kick off that debt-free journey that I shared a few minutes ago, by the way. Fast forward a year, and my boss called me to her office on an April morning. She handed me an envelope as she struggled to make eye contact. For the third time, I found myself in that foggy room situation. The air was thick, the tension palpable. I knew something big and something wrong was happening. Unfortunately, after just 1 year, the funding for my job dried up and I was laid off. She did everything she could to save it, but there was nothing to be done. There was simply no funding to pay my salary. So imagine this moment. Just weeks after learning that my wife and I were expecting our first child, I'd come home from work and tell her I'd lost my job, my income, my health benefits. We had no money. We were also a year into that debt-free journey, so we'd been sending every penny we could get our hands on towards my student loans. I will never forget the feeling of dread that I had on that bus ride home. 12 years of college, 1 year of an internship, unemployed. To make matters worse, the hiring cycle for universities is rigid. You're supposed to apply for positions in the fall. You complete the hiring process in the spring. You begin work the following fall. I lost my job in the spring, which means there were virtually 0 faculty jobs open. So I went into full freak-out mode and I applied to 100 jobs, mostly engineering jobs in industry. I felt like I was back at that career fair, watching my dreams of becoming a professor evaporate. I spent days tweaking my resume, customizing the cover letters. I made it a full-time job to apply for jobs and spending weeks typing my information into box after box after box and application after application. After 100 applications, I got 0 phone calls. You heard that right. 0. It makes sense looking back because I knew I didn't want these jobs, but I had to do something. I had just a few short months before my son would be born. I'll never forget the roller coaster experience of applying to jobs. After years of building my credentials, I was stuck applying to jobs I didn't want, mostly in places I didn't want to live, trying my best to stay positive, but it wasn't easy. I can still remember the feeling of finding a job posting that sounded promising. I'd read the description, start to get excited, picturing myself doing the work and maybe even enjoying it. I'd read on as the postage shifted from specific job description to company values and culture, and I started thinking, wow, this place actually sounds kind of cool. I was trying to make the most of the situation. Hiding at the bottom of the page would be this list of required qualifications. I don't know why they put it at the bottom. We get our hopes up, we got to read on, and then you find out. I don't know. I'd read each, nervous that I'd find something that would disqualify me, but I'd find nothing missing. My excitement would peak, and I'd click the Apply Now button. Next, I'd be asked to create an account, and then transcribe my resume line by line into their text boxes. There'd always be some question I didn't have the answer to. Before that, I'd have to take a little while to hunt down and find, what the heck is my high school street address anyhow? The last thing they'd ask for is for you to upload a PDF of your resume. Seriously? Why on earth did you just make me do the text boxes? So, I'd grown at having been forced to transcribe my resume, upload the PDF, move on. Eventually, I'd reached the end of the application, check the little box pledging to be honest, and press submit with some more excited knots in my stomach. I hope they pick me. I'd really like to work there. I wonder how long it'll take to hear something. I'd instantly open my email and there would be some automated confirmation. Great, they got it. Oh shoot, did I misspell something? Yeah, no, too late now. I'd spend the next hour glued to my email, pressing refresh a dozen times, even though it automatically updates. The next few weeks were torture. I'd stare at my email inbox, answer the phone anytime a strange number would call, only to discover it was some robot thinking the factory warranty on my vehicle was about to expire. One day turned into two, then became a week, then another week. Nothing. Silence. No response at all. I try and find an email or a phone number to follow up with. Nothing. Slowly, my enthusiasm faded, and I'd repeat this dance 100 times, each with the same long, silent rejection at the end. It was in this moment that I started to think there might be something wrong with the process I was following. My qualifications didn't seem to be doing much for me. I had great grades. Okay, I graduated with honors. I had a bachelor's, master's, PhD. I worked 3 industry co-ops during undergrad, and I left each of those with a stellar recommendation from my supervisor. I'd spent the last 7 years in grad school working for NASA and Boeing and Pratt & Whitney, United Technologies Research Center, U.S. Air Force. I held the title of lab manager. I coordinated the research efforts of 10 grad students working with jet engines. I negotiated research contracts. I landed the largest dollar value contract that had ever come into our lab. I authored 17 papers. I presented in a dozen international conferences. I won a Best Paper award nationally, and I had 2 patents in the process. To top it all off, I taught engineering courses at Virginia Tech, won the Favorite Faculty Award, and had even earned an extra certificate from the grad school. And yet, 100 applications later, I had not received a single phone call. Nothing. With a kid on the way, a mountain of student loans, and no idea where we'd be living next month, these were some of the most challenging times of my life. Thankfully, I didn't lose hope. I reflected on the process I was using to land a job, and I realized the truth. If a computer algorithm is judging me before a person even sees my resume, I've lost. So, what did I do? I got myself a stack of books and I started listening to podcasts, and I tried to find a different approach. Are you noticing a trend yet? Maybe it's the academic in me, but every time I find myself hitting rock bottom, the first step to turning things around is to open a book. As with time management and personal finance, I quickly discovered that no one was writing books for people like me, people like you and me. I learned a few solid principles, mostly about marketing, and figured out how to adjust my process. I spent my time building my image online as an engaged member of my professional community. I focused on connecting to people instead of companies. I focused on finding places that I truly believed I could make an impact, and I reached out to someone directly whether they had a job posted or not. Following this new approach, I applied to 25 more jobs, and I actually got 26 interviews. You heard that right. After one of the interviews, the person actually called a buddy at a different school to tell them about me, and that person picked up the phone and called me for an interview right there on the spot. Clearly, my credentials did not change in a couple of weeks, and yet I went from 100 applications and 0 phone calls to 25 applications and 26 phone calls. Several of these led to video and in-person interviews, site tours, job offers. Ultimately, I ended up landing that dream professor job a year sooner than I actually thought was possible. I negotiated a salary far above average, and I took the first steps into my dream career. Details best saved for another episode, or maybe several, but it all came down to 2 things: clarifying my dream, connecting to people. Let me take just a minute and unpack what it is I just shared with you. Rock bottom. 3 times in my life, I felt like I was hitting rock bottom. The first was my wake-up call to start spending my precious time with intention. The second was when I realized that my personal finances were wrecked. And the third was realizing that a career is a lot more than a paycheck. These all wrap up into a single concept that I believe is really important: living on purpose. See, I wasn't self-sabotaging intentionally. I was just going with the flow, doing what I saw everyone else doing. Working long hours is just what you do when you're in grad school. Everybody has student loans. Everybody borrows money to buy a car. Nobody really likes their jobs. They just take one that pays well and is tolerable. The folks around me and those who came before, they sent this message, but they were wrong. As I awakened from the fog and started transforming my life in response to each of these crises, the people around me noticed. It started with my fellow grad students in the lab, and then the undergrads that I managed for research, and the people I taught in class. Before long, I found myself being asked, even by senior colleagues, "How are you doing this?" I learned that I wasn't alone, and neither are you. Our world is full of momentum. There's a clearly painted line down the middle of the road that tells us what the normal path is. We all follow it because we've never been able to imagine doing anything else. One by one, the people who asked, "How are you doing this?" started asking, "Could I do it too?" One by one, I shared my story. One by one, I shared my approach. One by one, I coached my friends, my colleagues, and my students into getting control of their time, their money, and their career. So, you're still here? What that tells me is that you're looking for a way to experience this for yourself. Maybe you're ready to take that step forward and live your one precious life on purpose. There's an old story by a guy named Zig Ziglar. Yeah, that was his name, Zig Ziglar, about a jar full of fleas. The story goes that if you put some fleas in a jar and you put the lid on, they'll start jumping and hitting their heads on the inside of the lid. You leave them in there long enough and they'll get tired of bumping their heads and they'll start jumping just a little shorter. If you wait a little longer, you can actually take the lid off that jar and not a single flea will jump out. They'll hop around just millimeters away from freedom. They've learned a new limit on what they think is possible, and they will die in that jar, even though they have everything they need within them to jump to freedom. I don't know if this is true or if it's just a great parable. Honestly, it doesn't matter. The point is, we've all been bumping our heads on the inside of the lid for a while now. We've learned not to aim quite as high to avoid the pain of hitting what seems to be an insurmountable obstacle. I'm here to tell you, there is no lid. I'm not even sure there's a jar. This world is an amazing place to be, and waking up to realize that you don't have to go with the flow, that you don't have to join those around you in the journey to nowhere, and that instead you can build the life that you want most. That's what the Intentional Academy and that's what this podcast are all about. So welcome, my friend. It is time to face that call that I warned you about at the beginning of this episode. It is time to decide whether you're going to change or if you're going to continue doing more of the same. Build the life you want most, or let the days continue to drift by on a journey to nowhere. I hope you'll stick with us. Hit the subscribe button. Leave a comment. Visit intentionalacademy.com/community and fill out the form to become one of us. You're only alone in this if you choose to be. intentionalacademy.com/community. We're waiting for you. And we'll be back next week to talk about what it really looks like to spend your time intentionally. We've got one chance at this. You can't go make more time. Next week, we're going to explore what it means to live a life that you love, get things done, and enjoy it all. I can't wait to see you there. Make it easy on yourself. Hit the subscribe button to the podcast so that you don't miss a single episode. That's it. The first ever Intentional Academy podcast episode. Thank you for being here. Launching this has been a dream for years, and we are finally able to bring it to you in the style we hope for. If you found this impactful, you may know of someone else who could benefit from it as well. Please consider sharing this episode with a few people who matter to you, a few people who you would like to see succeed living their best lives too. Thanks again, my friend, and we will see you next week.